Welcome back, guys, to the JPS podcast. And we are here today with Mike Banna. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, mate. How are you?
I am very well. Better for seeing you. We met 2023.
No, it was last year.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
24. Feels like a
time
long
flies.
time ago. It feels
I
like a
know.
long time ago, doesn't
It
it?
really does. It really
At
does.
the Expo conference in Singapore.
Yeah,
And today we're going to be talking about mental health. So I wanted to get your opinion because this is something that you talk about all day, every day, as we were talking and discussing earlier before we started this recording. So what are some of the, I guess, common misconceptions people have about their mental health? Like where do they go wrong, I guess, Mike?
sure. I mean, where to start? I think like the generally people's perception and any discussions about mental health, like to caveat this before we even start, is just it's kind of overshadowed by, decades, centuries of mental health related stigma, the way that society has approached mental health, the way that mental health and mental illness have historically been viewed by society. Like obviously this isn't even the same from country to country. Culturally, the way that we look at mental health is so different. So a lot of people, when approached with any sort of difficulties or challenges with their mental health, can react in a complete variety of different ways. Some people are so stigmatized by it that they wouldn't be willing to even face the idea that they could have a mental health problem. Some people will then perhaps accept that they might have a mental health problem, but wouldn't be willing to accept things like conventional treatments, therapies, medications, and things like that. I'm sure in your industry you've heard people talk about the gym being their therapy, stuff like that. Um, there's a huge amount of misconceptions and like where to even start. So I think if we talk about general day-to-day lifestyle for people in 2025, we're living a lifestyle for the most part that isn't generally conducive to good and positive mental health. And the things that we think are supporting our mental health probably aren't doing so. We're widely available on our phones pretty much 24 hours a day. We're scrolling social media. We're living vicariously through other people's lives. We are working way more hours without even, I think, realizing it. I think, if you look at what the lifestyles of people were like in the 80s and 90s, people were going to work, coming home, and then spending the evening having downtime with their families or whatever. Whereas now, you could be sitting and watching a film with your family, but you've got your emails on your phone, you've got WhatsApp, you've got group chats, you've got things going on all the same time. So your mind is buzzing in ways that I think it never was before. I think substances also like are a huge issue. So when we look at things like alcohol, what do people drink alcohol for? They drink alcohol to have a good time, to unwind, neither of which are actually what alcohol does to us from a mental health perspective. We have overwhelming evidence that alcohol has a negative effect on our mental well-being, both from the perspective of being a depressant in itself and also increasing our anxiety. So we do a lot of things I think that are counterproductive. And I don't think it's limited to that: diet, nutrition, lack of
Yeah.
exercise, over exercise.
Yep. And there's so much to unpack there. And I think the complexity of mental health um, is really underappreciated by a lot of people. It's very much an umbrella term and people use it willy-nilly without really understanding what it involves. But I wanted to discuss resistance training as therapy. So, or exercise as therapy. Is that really the same? And does it have the same impact on markers of mental well-being as conventional therapy? And I guess let's just discuss that.
So, I mean, fundamentally, I think the point is it doesn't need to. I think I get quite frustrated, I think, by, and I know it's just semantics and I know what people mean by it, but I mean, therapy is therapy. Why can't we just call therapy therapy and we call resistance training, and we can still accept the benefits that it has without calling it therapy? It's like, food is medicine, exercise is medicine. We don't need to make up these, stock snap phrases in order to actually get the benefits from the things that we're talking about. So, firstly, I would say there are overwhelming benefits from physical activity and, resistance training. There's huge amounts of evidence, and there are kind of studies and things that compare and contrast things like, medication versus exercise and things like that. But I think if you break it down to a practical real life strategy, if you have a problem and you want to fix it, you want to do everything you can to support it. Why would you want to, or why would you need to choose one thing over another? Exercise and therapy are not mutually exclusive. So if you had a problem with your mental health or a problem with mental illness and you wanted to attack it and resolve it, what would stop you from engaging in physical activity and also engaging in therapy? And does it matter which one was more beneficial than the other? No, because what matters is that you feel better by the end of it, right? So I think that it doesn't need to be a competition. We can employ all methods available to us. If you want to do exercise and be more physically active, you don't just do resistance training. You also do endurance training. You do cardio. You do intervals. There isn't just one method of trying to get better or be better. So we don't need that like magic bullet. But I mean, I would never want to underestimate the benefits of physical activity. And it goes beyond just the resistance training itself. So being in a gym environment, being in a coaching environment, having a coach like one-to-one coaching, I think is quite therapeutic. Like I think the gym is therapeutic. It's just not it's not cognitive behavioral therapy, but it is, talking to people, it is engaging with people, it is having connection with people, it's achieving something physically which boosts your confidence and your self-esteem, it's improving your physical activity. There's huge benefits to it.
Yeah. So CBT, talk to me about that. It's obviously psychotherapy, helps people identify and change, unproductive thoughts, behaviors, and promote better emotional well-being and whatnot. So talk to me about some of the benefits, I guess, that people can get, because we will get into the resistance training and exercise related benefits for mental health. But let's talk about therapy. Why is therapy beneficial and specifically cognitive behavioral therapy?
Okay, so to again caveat this, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't conduct therapy. And actually, as a GP, which is my role, what I would do is perhaps recommend talking therapies as a whole to people, and they would go to a talking therapy service, and the psychologist who they speak to would help them decide which type of therapy is beneficial to them. And there's lots of different types of therapy, ranging from, just well-being support, guided self-help, um, to psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is far more in depth, and things like that, and everything in between, things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, straightforward counseling, stuff like that too. So when we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, it's of course got three words in it, and it does that. It changes, it challenges your cognition and how that results in your behavior, basically. So the connection between your thoughts and your actions is challenged and explored, and it helps you to try and understand why you behave the way that you behave. And it's really interesting because I think like there's huge blurs between the boundaries of things like what is our personality, what is our character, and what is our mental health and our behaviors, and how they all intertwine with each other is hugely complex. So it's trying to kind of figure out why those things happen. We talk about like for example, we engage in lots of negative behaviors generally in our lives, or we might self-sabotage, we might not achieve things that we are able to achieve, we might feel low when we shouldn't feel low, um, we might put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So it's kind of exploring those connections and doing the work that it takes to try and reframe the world basically and look at things differently.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of benefits to therapy, but I think one thing I find a lot of my clients and just people in general struggle with is knowing when to pull the trigger on
Mhm.
therapy and uh, having the realization, okay, I need help here. So, what is your advice there? Because I feel like that's one of the most important steps is for people to be able to recognize that, okay, I need help. And obviously, there is all the stigma associated with, therapy and things like this. Um, but I guess what are your go-to signs that it might be time to speak to someone or seek professional help?
I mean, I th if you talk to a lot of people would say anyone can benefit from having therapy. So there's no real need to have a sign or a trigger that you need it. I think if you're starting to even think about needing it, then the
Mm.
chances are that you might benefit from it. So why not? So if you have access to it and you're able to get it done, then what are you going to lose? I think essentially, I think people think of therapy as this big, scary, giant object, and they think of if there's somebody who has, I think this is the problem is it becomes stigmatized, it becomes part of your identity. So people don't look at it as having therapy. You know, like if you thought I fancy a chocolate milkshake today, you might have a chocolate milkshake, and if you didn't like it that much, you might not have a second one, right? But you don't think, oh God, I've got to make this huge decision about whether I'm the kind of person who has a chocolate milkshake or not. I don't know why I chose chocolate milkshakes as an example, but there we go.
Yeah, no
But
reason.
maybe. But I think that that's the point is I think we look at it as a much bigger deal than it actually is. And I include myself in this. I think we're all subject to those same sort of stigmas and ideas and things, but the key is challenging them. And I think if you're thinking that you might benefit from therapy, then what harm are you going to do by trying it? I think there's a lot of fear that's involved as well because I think people are frightened that they will open cans of worms, sorry. Like, you know, if you think that you may have suffered psychological trauma or something in the past and you know that there's sort of something that's kind of untapped and untouched in there, it's pretty scary to kind of think about exploring and opening that up, which might make you feel worse before it makes you feel better. There's also, I think, you know, in terms of the quality of therapists that are available, that's very different for different people. I think there are some issues with regulation and stuff like that. Like, say, for example, the term therapist it's not a protected term. So you can call yourself a therapist. You can even call yourself a psychotherapist, I think, without qualification. So it's a worry, like checking credentials and stuff is a concern for a lot of people as well. So you know, I think it's worth considering if you're considering it, it's worth doing, basically, is probably I'd say I'd have a pretty low threshold for it.
Yeah, I like that approach. I think, yeah, it doesn't hurt, but the challenge I feel most people will have is, the barriers to entry,
Mhm.
or at least the perceived barriers to entry,
Yeah.
time, cost, all of those kind of things. But what a lot of people will try to do is, I guess, improve other areas of their life before they seek therapy. And as we know, resistance training, exercise, better nutrition, better sleep, stress management, all these kind of things can have a significant impact on our overall mental well-being. So, I guess what are some of the self-care practices that are evidence-based and really anyone can apply any day, any time to start making changes to their mental well-being?
You know, you touched on it already, but physical activity is pretty huge. Particularly even things like the difference between indoor and outdoor activity. So physical activity itself is really beneficial, but also things like green spaces, outdoor exercise. You know, like a lot of people talk about the benefits of awe, like being in awe of the world.
Yeah.
There are kind of physiological connections as well um, between how we view the world and how we view ourselves. So getting out into big green spaces and kind of that recognition of our place in the world being, you know, we aren't the universe.
I'm not as significant as I thought.
Yeah, understanding perspective and not like in a negative way, because I think that can also be taken in a negative way. But I think just kind of remembering that the world is bigger than those problems that you're focusing on. So perspective, I think, is really helped by stuff like outdoor spaces, green spaces, human connection, of course. But you know, all of the basics, the things that we advise people to do all the time that none of us are any good at. So, you know, decent nutrition, decent physical activity, decent sleep, avoidance of harmful substances. So not an over reliance on, you know, caffeine and energy drinks and alcohol and all of the things that a lot of us probably overconsume. Um, making sure that you're having decent amounts of human connection, making sure that you're exploring your problems and addressing them rather than kind of hiding from them and ignoring them. Stress reduction at work, making sure that you're taking regular breaks, having boundaries, all of the things that sound really minimal on their own, and all of the things we know we should be doing, but that we're not necessarily great at doing. And then you get into the other stuff like, mindfulness, meditation, like more formalized versions of that, gratitude, journaling. And these are things that, like, I'll mention some of these words and there will be people listening that will shudder. And actually, I shudder at the idea of journaling, for example. I absolutely cannot stand it. I know it's beneficial, but I very much struggle to do it. It feels to me to be, artificial, it's uncomfortable. But I know that if I'm really struggling, that's something I should try and kind of almost force myself to do. Because even if it doesn't feel beneficial, I think that's the thing is a lot of things that don't always feel beneficial can be doing us good. Because when we think of benefits, we think of enjoyment, really, don't we? And sometimes the things that we don't enjoy the most can be beneficial to us, like cardio.
Yeah, and you had to sneak that one in there, didn't you, Mike? Yeah, absolutely. And I think just want to go back to the point about the differences between indoor, outdoor exercise. I think there's even big differences between exercise on your own versus with other people. The social aspects and the human connection is, I think, something that people are really lacking in
Mm,
2025. A lot more time behind a screen. Just communication is all online, and remote work now is, really limiting the amount of interactions we have each day. So yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on, how people can potentially seek out those kind of activities where they're getting some physical exercise and socializing, and just some basic steps around that.
yeah. So the thing that I have kind of found and kind of sort of explored myself is that, like, let's say for example we know that we need to have a community, we need to have support, we need to have friends and people that are in our corner and people that we talk to. But if you said, right, I'm going to arrange a social meetup for like a bunch of people to become friends and be friends, I don't think you'd get a great uptake, right? We'd all think like, oh God, that's really awkward. I don't want to just go and hang out with a bunch of strangers that I don't know and try and be friends with them. That's going to be weird. But I think we find all of these little situations are becoming more and more popular. So, group training at the gym, circuit classes, spinning classes, BJJ, like people joining kind of BJJ clubs and gaining kind of immense communities from this. But it doesn't have to happen in that way. But I think everybody needs something. Some people, play online gaming. Some people, and again, that's different because it's more screen time and stuff like that too. But things like, hobbies, just engaging in our hobbies. And if you engage in hobbies in a slightly more public setting, chances are you'll develop some level of community out of it as well, and you'll make friends that you didn't perhaps even set out to make. So, I've had situations where I've joined gyms that are more community based, and those gyms closed down years ago, but I'm still friends with people that I met through the gym and I consider them super close friends. So, it's not to like the power of this stuff is not to be underestimated. And what we saw during the pandemic is when gyms closed and people couldn't exercise, they lost, like a lot of people lost a significant chunk of their social life. And they didn't even realize that that was where their social life was happening. And, I'm all for it because before that used to be the kind of stuff that happened at pubs.
Yeah.
People would go out drinking and meet people at the pub and they would have drinking buddies. And, there's of course benefits to having friends, but of course, if it's always associated with harmful substances, not quite so beneficial. But if it's associated with, a training session where you're all supporting each other, all feeling better, and you all feel great afterwards, like fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's hard because the initial I guess barriers to engaging in a community are very daunting. If you don't already
Yeah.
have a community that exists, and putting yourself out there can be challenging, and trying something new. Um, But yeah, I've certainly found the benefits of the social aspects with exercise to be hugely beneficial, for my mental health, playing basketball, with a group of 10 guys, yeah, and then tennis, with some mates and stuff like that. These kind of things, I think are hugely, valuable. People are now engaging in run clubs and things like this. And I think post, pandemic, we've really seen, um, the I guess the need for more community, for our mental well-being, and people are certainly using, exercise as a vehicle to, obtain that community. So I think that's something that, people can definitely look to do and obviously focus on, in their mental health, journey and brushing their mental health teeth.
Yeah.
But back to your, journaling. I found that quite interesting. I am in the exact same boat as you. I think, you and I, in many regards, have quite similar sort of tendencies around this stuff. I find it hard to journal. I can't meditate. I find it very, very difficult to just sit there and, be present without any, thoughts, even guided meditations. Very, very challenging for me. But that's where exercise for me is, therapeutic in that regard, because, I'm completely present when I'm playing basketball. I'm just running around and I'm focused on that. So I wanted to get your take on some of the mindfulness, meditation and journaling stuff. Like, what are the benefits of those things? Like, why are they helpful? Obviously, um, they improve your mental health, but like why and how?
Well, I think like because they improve clarity, they help you to frame and reframe situations. They help you to, it's like it's the reflective process of it, I think, is beneficial. So the idea of taking a situation and looking at it like more objectively, taking it out of your head and onto a piece of paper, for example, like that activity in itself is what's, kind of helping you look at it from the outside in rather than from the inside out. Um, I like the saying, you can't read the label when you're inside the jar. And I think that kind of stuff helps you. It just helps you objectify things a little bit more. Um, I think that the gratitude side of things is the gratitude side of things, I think, is hard to balance because I think there's a fine line between gratitude reframing and like gaslighting yourself into just thinking everything is fine, right? But I also think that I think this is why I think it's such an individual thing. So, like for example, I mentioned I struggle with journaling. So if I've got like 20 or 30 different mental health, like different techniques to support my mental health, it doesn't matter if I really can't get on with journaling. You can't do everything, right? But having all of these different things and figuring out which ones work for you and which ones support you is important. So if I sort of turned around to you, or if I said, look, I think I need some help with my mental health, and you said, try journaling. I can't. I don't want to do that. Okay, try mindfulness. I don't want to do that. Try meditation. I don't want to do that. Try therapy. I don't want to do that. Try medication. I don't want to do that. Try giving up alcohol. Don't want to do that. Try exercise. Don't want to do that. You can't do nothing, but you
Yeah.
don't have to do everything. So I think that's the key is that like and something that you brought up about exercise, I think is really important. Like things can be meditative without being meditation. And I think the struggle with meditation is absolutely universal. I don't know anybody who has ever said, "Oh yeah, I tried meditation. It was really easy, and I'm really good at it." Right? You're not meant to be good at meditation. It's not how it works. Part of it is it's just the process of trying to improve at it that is the meditation, right? So that is beneficial even in itself. So even if you don't think that you're doing it well, doing it is cool. I think that a lot of people turn to things that are sort of, meditative by default. So things like, heavy exercise. So like if you're doing a super heavy set of squats, you're not going to be thinking about your shopping list or what you've got to do at work today because you're super focused on what you're doing. So that in itself is sort of quite meditative. A lot of people over here. It's a slightly different process in Australia, I'm sure. Freezing cold sea dips. I used to go and get in the sea once a week throughout the whole year. And I would find that like I would struggle to empty my mind until I was standing like neck deep in ice cold water. And then suddenly my mind is empty. But it's also quite miserable. So it's not perhaps the greatest thing to do. So the idea of being able to meditate without having to do those things is pretty cool as well. Like so actually working on the skill itself. But that's not to kind of belittle or undo the benefits of having those meditative experiences and those mindful experiences. Going for a walk like in the forest or whatever without your mobile phone, although that's not necessarily the safest thing to do in all environments, is going to be beneficial because you're going to have that mindfulness and that detachment because all you have to look at is the world around you. You're not scrolling on your phone or having a chat to someone or listening to an audiobook or a podcast or music, right? So I think it is different for everybody. And I know that that's sort of I've gone on a tangent and rather than answering the actual question, but hopefully that's a bit of an answer as well.
Yes, no, no, no. Certainly. So, I think something that's really interesting that I always find difficult discussing with clients when they're struggling with their mental health is finding that balance between self-care and taking the, very gentle approach to look after yourself
Yeah,
versus actually getting in there and doing the hard thing
yeah, yeah,
and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and not allowing yourself to be this fragile, little being that gets mollycoddled and you're trying to protect yourself from all the hard things and
yeah.
difficulties in life. So talk to me about that. How do people, I guess, know when it's time to cool? I've got to be gentle on myself. Like I need to actually slow down. I need to start looking after myself versus, hey, I probably can just push through this and I'll be better off for doing that.
So self-care, like absolutely everything on the internet, is just something that has been completely misconstrued and bastardized into being something that it isn't. So I think that the easiest way to look at it is that self-care should be looked at like self-parenting. So if you imagine that you are parenting yourself. So if you're parenting a child and you want that child to be a great, well-rounded person who has a great life, you want them to work hard, but you also want them to rest when it's important. So, when you're parenting a child, you want to give them sweets from time to time, right? To give them treats, but you're not going to let them have a diet consisting entirely of sweets. You're also going to take the sweets away from them if they're over consuming them, for example. You are doing in self-care what it takes to make you the best version of yourself. Self-care isn't donuts and having baths. Self-care is having hard conversations with yourself and saying, actually, the best thing I can do for myself today is to get the hell out of bed, go to the gym, do a hard training session, do a day's work, and then come home and rest and spend some time with the people that I love, doing things that I love. I've got all this work to do. Self-care isn't ignoring it, and therefore not doing it because I need a rest. It's going, okay, I need a rest. So I'm going to take a 20-minute break from this work and then I'm going to attack it harder than I was before because that's what's going to benefit me the most. Self-care isn't losing your job because you don't get your work done or, being unfit or not taking care of yourself. It's the opposite of that. But sadly, if you go somewhere like Instagram, content that's going to resonate with people is either things is generally things that they want to hear. So if people are doing a post about how, oh, it's okay to eat donuts, then people are going to repost and share and like and comment on that post. And suddenly the message goes from it's okay to eat a donut from time to time to being it's okay to have your diet consist entirely of donuts. Stop letting people tell you what to do, that sort of stuff. So I think that's where the problem has come. But if you look at it more like self-parenting than self-care, I think you can't go far wrong.
Yeah, I really like that, Mike. And I guess to round things out, what are one or two daily habits of yours that you implore or you try to apply to your routine that keep your mental health in check?
Um, Well, again, I absolutely hate to hold myself up as any example of mental health. Like I do it professionally, but that doesn't mean that I'm good at it in terms of upholding my own mental well-being. And I think that's the really important thing to say is that there isn't anyone that doesn't struggle with managing to implement any forms of kind of lifestyle change and things that are difficult to do, right? But for me, I think it's generally like a certain amount of physical activity every day is probably one of the most important things to me, and also human connection. Which again, I'm pretty lucky that I get human connection all day at work anyway. I get to chat to people all day. That's great. It's a different type of human connection than happens outside of work. So, like for me, for example, I spend all day talking. So sometimes when I finish work, I just want to be by myself or just, not talk to anybody, not speak on the phone for a while, just, do nothing. And I know that's not particularly great for my mental well-being. So it's trying to counteract that and make sure I have enough time and space for my own human connection rather than that of just others.
Human connection, highly underrated. Key takeaway from this podcast, guys. I think in your mental health journey, self-care, reaching out to others, having a network of people that you interact with in a meaningful way, I think is super important. And if you can then marry exercise to that, um, even better. And obviously hobbies and things like that, where you're getting some sense of enjoyment, not just socializing for the sake of socializing. Sometimes I think that's beneficial, but doing positive things with people who you have some common interests with, I think goes a long way. What do you think, Mike?
Completely agree, 100%. And I think it's about like you don't need to make it artificial. You don't need to sit down and have a deep and meaningful conversation about something specific. It's just connecting with people, and when you talk to people, the right conversations come out in the end if you're open.
Yep, I like it, Mike. Thank you very much for your time, brother. As always, you are a pleasure to chat to. Pearls of
Likewise.
wisdom, very sound and rational advice, which is much needed and very welcomed. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you.